The oppressive humidity of the Brazilian countryside seemed to amplify the knot of dread twisting in Eloy's gut. The deeper they drove into the desolate expanse, the more convinced he became that something was terribly wrong. Night had fallen, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed in the headlights of the van. An unnatural silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the distant drone of unseen machinery. Eloy, a man burdened by the weight of providing for his wife and 2 young children back in Campo Mourão, tried to ignore the growing unease. This job, this desolate outpost in Vitória da Conquista, was his lifeline after months of unemployment. He couldn't afford to be spooked by shadows and bad feelings. Beside him, Antonio Carlos, the veteran technician, chuckled, his expression reassuring despite the grim set of his jaw. He reminded Eloy that this was just another job, another night. They'd be in and out before he knew it. In the back, Diego, the youngest of the crew, fidgeted nervously. He wondered aloud if anyone else felt a sense of foreboding, a feeling that the place itself was somehow hostile. Eloy forced a smile and tried to lighten the mood. They were there to fix electrical systems, not chase imaginary monsters. But even as he spoke, a shiver ran down his spine. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation, but beneath it all, a faint alien odor lingered, something akin to wet fur and rot. He glanced at the imposing fences that surrounded the facility, the barbed wire glinting ominously in the moonlight. Something felt off, something primal and predatory lurking just beyond the reach of the headlights. As they pulled up to the gates, the oppressive silence was broken by the clang of metal and the harsh glare of floodlights. 2 heavily armed guards emerged from the shadows, their faces grim and unwelcoming. They scrutinized the workers with suspicion, their eyes flickering towards the dense forest that bordered the property. Even Antonio Carlos seemed unnerved by their intensity. He commented that the level of security seemed excessive for a simple maintenance job. The guards exchanged a few curt words in Portuguese, their voices too low for Eloy to understand. One of them gestured impatiently for them to enter, his rifle held at the ready. Eloy felt a cold sweat prickling his skin. This was no ordinary maintenance job. Their accommodations were Spartan, a small concrete room furnished with 2 sets of bunk beds and a single flickering fluorescent light. A worker, his face etched with worry, escorted them to their quarters. He warned them, his voice barely a whisper, to stay inside the main building after dark, citing company policy. When Diego pressed him for an explanation, the worker hesitated, then mumbled something about safety protocols and hurried away, leaving them alone in the oppressive silence. Eloy felt a growing sense of foreboding, but he pushed it down, reminding himself of the empty fridge and the worried look in his wife's eyes when he'd left that morning. He had to see this job through. That night, as they worked in the cavernous silos, the metallic echo of their tools seemed to amplify the unsettling atmosphere. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decaying grain. Eloy found himself constantly glancing over his shoulder, his senses on high alert. During a break, Diego relayed a disturbing rumor he'd overheard. Apparently, the company had implemented a strict curfew after a series of incidents involving some kind of creature. The guards, it was said, were issued silver bullets. Eloy tried to laugh it off, but the fear in Diego's eyes mirrored his own growing apprehension. Antonio Carlos scoffed at the idea, dismissing the rumors as ridiculous. Silver bullets? It sounded like something out of a horror movie. But later, as Eloy lay in his bunk, unable to sleep, he couldn't shake the image of the guards' tense faces and the ominous glint of moonlight on their rifles. He heard a scuttling in the ceiling and the distant howl of what sounded like a dog, but deeper, more feral. He told himself it was just the wind, just his imagination playing tricks on him. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The next day, a Saturday, was a grueling marathon of dismantling faulty equipment and hauling debris. The physical exhaustion, however, was a welcome distraction from the gnawing anxiety that had taken root in Eloy's mind. He found himself constantly scanning the perimeter, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. Even the bright sunshine couldn't fully dispel the sense of unease that clung to the facility like a shroud. That evening, Adão, the jovial driver who had transported them from the airport, arrived to take them to a local village festival. The prospect of a night away from the oppressive atmosphere of the company lifted their spirits. As they drove through the countryside, Eloy noticed an unusual number of stray dogs slinking through the fields. their eyes gleaming with an unnatural intensity. He also spotted strange symbols painted on the sides of some of the farmhouses, crude depictions of wolves with glowing eyes. He tried to dismiss them as local superstitions, but the images lingered in his mind, fueling his unease. The festival was a vibrant explosion of music, dance, and laughter. The air was filled with the tantalizing aroma of grilled meats and sweet pastries. For a few precious hours, Eloy allowed himself to be swept away by the festive atmosphere, the anxieties of the past few days fading into the background. He shared stories and laughter with his colleagues, and for the first time since arriving in Vitória de Conquista, he felt a sense of normalcy. But as the night wore on, and the time to return to the facility drew closer, the sense of dread returned with a vengeance. The journey back was fraught with tension. The road was rough and winding, and the van's headlights struggled to penetrate the thick darkness that pressed in on all sides. Then, without warning, the engine sputtered and died. The van lurched to a halt, plunging them into an oppressive silence. Adon swore under his breath and fumbled under the hood, but it quickly became clear that this was no ordinary breakdown. The fuel line had been cleanly severed, as if by a knife. A cold fear gripped Eloy's heart. They were stranded, vulnerable, and exposed. Arming themselves with whatever tools they could find, the four men set off on foot, their flashlights casting feeble beams into the encroaching darkness. The forest seemed to press in on them, the rustling leaves and snapping branches whispering secrets they didn't want to hear. Then a low growl echoed through the trees, sending a jolt of fear through their veins. A massive shape emerged from the shadows, moving with an unnatural speed and agility. Its eyes burned with an eerie amber light, and its teeth gleamed like daggers in the moonlight. The stench of decay and wet fur filled the air, confirming their worst fears. The creature was upon them. Chaos erupted. They scrambled for safety, their hearts pounding in their chests. Eloy stumbled and fell, his flashlight rolling away into the darkness. He looked up to see the creature looming over him, its jaws open in a silent snarl. He braced himself for the inevitable, but then a shot rang out and the creature recoiled, a gash appearing on its flank. The guards, alerted by the commotion, had arrived. A fierce firefight ensued, the night air filled with the deafening roar of gunfire and the creature's enraged howls. Eloy, scrambling to his feet, saw Diego cowering behind a tree, his face pale with terror. He yelled for him to run, but Diego seemed frozen in place. The creature lunged at Diego, its claws outstretched. Eloy's blood ran cold. He watched in horror as Diego, in a desperate act of self-preservation, threw himself into a nearby storage shed, slamming the door shut just as the creature's claws raked across the wood. The flimsy door buckled under the onslaught, but Diego managed to escape through a back window, narrowly avoiding the creature's grasp. The guards continued to fire, their silver bullets finding their mark, but the creature seemed impervious to pain. It moved with an unnatural speed and ferocity, its eyes burning with an unholy light. Finally, with a piercing howl that echoed through the night, it retreated into the darkness, leaving behind a scene of chaos and destruction. The following morning, a search party discovered a body in the woods, riddled with bullets. The man's features were partially obscured by decomposition and animal scavenging, but the guards were convinced it was the creature. Eloy, however, wasn't so sure. He had seen the creature's resilience, its unnatural strength. Doubts lingered, a chilling premonition that the nightmare wasn't truly over. The survivors returned to Campo Moral, but they were forever changed by their experience. Eloy was haunted by nightmares and flashbacks. The memory of the creature's glowing eyes seared into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had brought this evil upon himself, that his desperation had blinded him to the warning signs. He carried the weight of responsibility for Diego's near death, the guilt a constant burden. Antonio Carlos, once a stoic and pragmatic man, became withdrawn and wary. The incident had shattered his sense of security, leaving him with a deep distrust of the unknown. He rarely spoke of the events in Vitória de Conquista, but the fear lingered in his eyes, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of reality. The company, eager to avoid negative publicity, offered the survivors generous compensation in exchange for their silence. Eloy, desperate to provide for his family, accepted the offer, but the guilt gnawed at him. He knew the truth, a truth that the company was determined to bury. He had glimpsed the darkness that lurked in the shadows, a darkness that defied explanation, and threatened to consume those who dared to venture too close. This story, adapted from Eloy's account originally shared on the NS Occulto YouTube channel, serves as a chilling reminder that the line between the ordinary and the monstrous can be terrifyingly thin. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror, and a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring the whispers of fear that sometimes echo in the darkest corners of our world.
In the shadows of the digital night, we've wandered far and seen some sights, from haunting tales to eerie lights, to net studios where fear ignites. So long, farewell from the crimson hollows. We'll be back again with more tales to follow. Keep the lights dimmed and your curiosity high, for in deadnet's realm the spirits never die. We've danced with ghosts, chased legends on, through cryptic codes, stories untold, in cyberspace where mysteries unfold. Our journey's been daring, brave and bold. So long, farewell from the darkened halls, where shadows whisper and the unknown calls. Keep your eyes wide and your mind astir, for the mysteries of deadnet are a haunting blur. In the world of strange and the unexplained, we find our stories wildly untamed. With each video's end, we take a little rest. We find the shackles every best.